Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. The show is entitled UK Lloyd Surrenders, FBI Caught Red-Handed. And in today's show, we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking a ton about Iran, obviously. Barbara is going to be briefing us on what's going on with this new FBI investigation, which is also, because of the current news cycle, has been just totally covered up. So let me just start with a quick briefing here. For the military picture, we're on day 13. Trump yesterday said we are very far ahead of schedule, and that Iran's military capabilities have largely been neutralized. And when asked what it would take to end it, he said simply more of the same. And this leads into the Strait of Hormuz, which is still effectively shut down. Tanker transits have dropped from about 50 per day before the war to about single digits or zero for the past few weeks. Iran's new supreme leader vowed to keep blocking the strait until the bombing stops. The Revolutionary Guard said Iran will not allow a single liter of oil through, and this is now officially the largest supply chain disruption in the history of the oil market, according to the IEA, with 20% of the global supply currently knocked out, which supposedly is more than double the Suez Crisis record. This sent oil back up above $100 a barrel. Gas is up to $3.59, $3.60 a gallon. And Trump has ordered the release of 172 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve yesterday. And collectively, the IEA's 32-member countries say they're going to release another 400 million barrels collectively from their reserves. Okay, so an update on the Navy escorts, because I know that was something we also been reporting on in the last week. Navy escorts, unfortunately, are not happening yet. Energy Secretary Chris Wright admitted today that the U.S. is not ready to escort tankers through the straits. I think there also have been reports over the last 36 hours that there are several tankers on fire in the straits. Okay, and currently he's saying all military assets are focused on destroying Iran's offensive capabilities first. White House had to they deleted a Wright post that falsely claimed escorts had already begun, but they had not. And ceasefire talks currently are murky. And again, this is only what we know in the world of above ground open source intelligence. Okay, so this last part, again, take with a grain of salt. Iran's intelligence operatives quietly reached out to the CIA through a third country's intelligence service to discuss terms. Iran's foreign minister publicly said they're not asking for a ceasefire and see no reason to negotiate. Iran's official conditions are recognition of its rights. They're asking for war reparations and guarantees against future strikes from both the U.S. and Israel. Trump's response to all of it: too late. Barbara, your thoughts?
Well, we're in a war, folks. I mean, that's basically what you can say. There's good days, there's bad days. The Strait of Hormuz, you'll be happy to know, the United States military has been preparing for this contingency ever since Iran mined the straits in 1988 during the Iran-Iraq war. So that's going to be cleaned up. How soon is probably a matter of days to a week. It will be a military action. But right now we're taking out, really, we're focused on the Revolutionary Guard, and we're focused on, blowing up the banks which finance them, armies when they don't get paid, get a little bit resistant to fighting, particularly when they're being bombed. And, you really don't know because of the fact that almost all of the press is aligned with the British, aligned with the Canadians, and essentially opposed to this war. So the press stance is really quite ridiculous. And the administration is really coming up against a time clock where they're not going to tell you, because of the necessity to actually conceal our actions, exactly what we're doing about all of this. It's obviously a tricky communications problem. But at the same time, I can guarantee you they're very, very aware of the problems and they're very, very aware that they're, and I have every belief that they're actually moving on them. This isn't, as we have emphasized over and over again, about Iran per se. It is about reshaping the global strategic environment, which is what Trump is doing. So far, think about it, he's united the entire Gulf arena and Israel into an anti-Iranian, anti-fundamentalist, anti-dark age, which is really what the Ayatollahs represent, perspective. China has come out in the last 24 hours condemning Iran's actions against its neighbors and condemning Iran. That's the first. A UN resolution passed condemning this whole thing, with Russia and China abstaining, all right, which is a very, very big deal. So all of the actual support they thought they had is evaporating, and we're in an irregular warfare situation, where communications become essential. And you have to factor in that the British and that entire alignment of press organs are on the other side. If you listen to some person's, on the one side, you got Fox News, who's parading deliberately in your face every single war hawk in the world. So that's not a channel you can look to. And then the liberal press is just ridiculous. They might as well be a propaganda organ for Iran. So that's where I think the war stands. And at the same time, the war itself has driven off the front pages a huge development here in the United States concerning 10 years of treason against the President of the United States coming from our intelligence community. You might think that you know this already, but I'm going to tell you right now, you really don't. And we'll get into this a little bit later as we get into the broadcast. So that's where I would like to actually end the opening.
Thank you, Barbara. And I want to give a quick shout out right at the beginning here to Mark. Thank you for the very, very generous super chat and for joining us every week. I really hope you're on our midterm boot camp session. We'll talk more about that later, but our next boot camp is tomorrow, actually, if I'm not mistaken. Susan, what are your thoughts to open up today's show?
I just want to highlight one thing. Could you share the screen, Adam? Barbara referenced this, but I think this is really singular. Yesterday, the UN Security Council condemned Iran's retaliatory strikes in the Middle East. Now, how do you get a Security Council resolution through? It can't be vetoed by anybody. And Russia and China abstained. They did not veto, which is highly significant. Barbara just mentioned that China independently condemned Iran's attacks on its neighbors. And there was also a Russian proposal which didn't pass, but it called for an end to the war, and it didn't assign blame or even name the parties. In other words, it didn't attack the great Satan, United States, or Israel. It just said, stop the war. So both China and Russia are taking a very interesting position in the context of this. And I think that is highly significant because we are in a dramatic remake of the world strategic map. And people are kind of trapped in the old way of thinking things, and all of us. I mean, I've lived, I was born after World War II, and I was very young during Korea. But there is not a war that I have supported up until now. And you have to ask yourself the question, what has changed? And I was thinking about it from the following standpoint. Go back even earlier. Go back to all the wars that the British initiated, starting at the end of the 19th century, to prevent the American system from spreading throughout the world. The wars that led into World War I, World War II, the wars that led into World War I, World War I itself, the Russian Revolution, all sorts of chaos, all of which we would have been much better. If I were alive back then, I wouldn't have supported any of those wars. But then and then the British created Hitler. And then at a certain point, Hitler becomes a Frankenstein monster. This is a war you had to fight. It didn't matter that previously you were opposed to all those British instigated wars. And this was a British created Frankenstein monster. And guess what? We ended up having to ally with Britain to stop Hitler. And I think we're in exactly the kind of situation we are today, which is why we are, quote, working with Israel, in the same way that we had to work with Britain to stop something which had been, was going to destroy the world. So I think people just have to constantly ground themselves in history and ground themselves in a future where the power of the British Empire and its assets, whether it's the mullahs, whether it's the radical Zionists in Israel, whatever, that once you break the power of the British Empire, you can deal with all of their other assets. And I am absolutely convinced that that is the intention of this administration. So that's how I'd start.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Susan. And thank you, everyone on X.com and everyone on YouTube. If you are joining us on YouTube, please drop us a like on the way in. If you're on X.com, please give us a share. I just reposted the show on my own profile. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, and I'd like to give a quick shout out here to Thomas. Thank you, Thomas, for joining us again. Barbara and Susan are the teachers I didn't get to have. Thank you for joining us, Thomas, every week. And thank you, everyone else in the chat. I know I haven't been saying too much today, but I've been reviewing the chat real quick. All right, so let's get started on today's questions. We have about 20 or so questions that we got from our email newsletter subscribers. And the first one, we're going to get right to it on the issue of Iran. So thank you, Fariba, for this question. What should Iranians do to prevent British influence in Iran after the Islamic regime is gone? Thank you very much for your question, Fariba. Barbara and Susan.
Well, I think it's funny because people are actually, I think, focused on the wrong debate. People keep talking about who's the new head honcho going to be. And really what you got to think about is what is the Constitution for the Republic of Iran? What is our nation state about? And you have to have, if you think about the American Revolution, we had a whole lot of potential leaders out there, but we really had to debate to bring the population on board. What is it we're doing? What is it we're constituting? What is our theory of what this state is going to be? How do we actually adopt the best practices of nation states that have actually survived for a very long time? Obviously, you want to adapt the ideas and principles of the Constitution of the United States because of the fact that this has worked to an Iranian context, which is going to make it different. You're going to decide on different things, but the principles, i.e., what are human beings? The British would say they're really beasts who need a supervening authority to govern them. They're not really governed by the creativity which God gave to every human being in whatever Abrahamic religion you're talking about. We are creative human beings who are here to continue to perfect God's creation. That's the principle. You have to basically foster that creativity in human beings. And there are lots of things in every one of these religions, traditions, which evoke that. The Persian culture was a great culture. There are all sorts of Platonic thinkers in Persian culture. When it reached its highest point, what the British decided to do was to impose what really was an alien ideology, which is the British notion of what human beings are. They're beasts. They need to be controlled. You need to set up a police state, in essence, to actually have a sovereign state. So you got to think about that. And the key to British influence is the difference between what great religions in the world say human beings are and what the British say they are. And that's where you start.
Yeah, and I would just add, we've seen 47 years. Well, we've seen more than that because Mossadegh was overthrown by the British way back in the 1950s. You saw the creation of what is now British Petroleum, based on the oil fields in Iran even earlier. So I think as important as the, how the people of Iran themselves think about this, decide how they want to govern themselves as a nation, who their leaders are. I think I think even more important than that is that we have to weaken the British from the outside, which is why what Donald Trump has been doing throughout his entire administration, up to and now including this attack on, in a certain sense, Britain's Britain's second to the last hand grenade, in the Mideast. If you ask me, its last hand grenade is Israel, but you can't deal with that until you deal with Iran, right? It is the way that the president is constantly taking assets off the chessboard for the British imperial system and creating a world in which, look at what we showed at the beginning. Russia and China are playing a very, very different role in this fight than you would expect under the old British geopolitical playbook. So, I think it's critical, especially for people who are in our orbit, who are in the MAGA orbit, to understand where we stand in history and make sure that the external geometry within which the Iranian people make their choices is one in which the British Empire the British Empire's ability to dominate the world economically, strategically, and culturally is defeated once and for all.
Thank you. Quick shout out to our friends here. Thank you, PGEC. I just shared this video on my Truth Social profile and tagged President Trump. I hope he knows about Promethean action. Happy Friday. Thank you. Well, he already reposted earlier, last year, right? It was a few months ago. He reposted one of Susan's shows, right?
Barbara's.
One Barbara's shows.
Barbara shows.
Oh, I'm sure our videos have been making such a splash on social media. I'm sure people know who we are in Trump circles. He actually reposted it from his own Truth Social profile. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dawn Bell. Thank you for being an answer to prayer. Finally, somebody is taking the wheel and organizing the masses to support Donald Trump and save America. Thank you very much for joining us, Dawn. I think part of the reason why is because we're trying to approach this issue from beyond just the standpoint of political parties. We're really trying to reach for historical issues and trying to show people the longer threads of history that are actually involved in what you see going on in front of you right now. So thank you very much for joining us. Please make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We also have a free email newsletter. The link is in the description. Thank you for joining us, Dawn. And Janice, I believe the wool that is being pulled over the eyes of the world should be exposed. Thank you for sharing your information and insight. Awesome work. Thank you for joining us, Janice. And thank you everyone else too in the chat and everyone watching. We have almost 4,000 viewers, everyone. That's pretty awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, let's continue on the questions. Actually, before we do that, Barbara, you loaded up this clip here. Did you still want to talk about this FBI thing? Is that going to come later in the show?
I think we should handle it right now because I think it will give a sort of different view of the battlefield than people actually have at this point.
Yeah, so let me pull up some of the background for it here. So there was what started this whole thing was this article by John
Solomon.
Yeah, John Solomon's Just the News, this one right here.
Mm-hmm.
Trump targeted, whoops, I pull it up. Here we go. Okay. Yes, this article here. Trump targeted by 4 FBI code-named counterintel probes that ensnared hundreds of Americans. So,
okay, so what this is really something which is very, very dramatic. But you kind of miss the import of it, even if you just look at that headline and think, okay, what they're talking about is the criminal investigations that the FBI and the deep state did of Donald Trump. That's not what's being talked about here. What's being talked about here is what is called a counterintelligence operation, which means something quite different than a criminal investigation. It's what we use after 9/11. Essentially, all of the things towards Americans came off, particularly if they were terrorists trying to operate here in the United States after 9/11. So that a counterintelligence investigation is not necessarily aimed at getting a criminal indictment. It's aimed at what the FBI calls neutralizing the target. And that means I can use any means necessary, from illegal black bag jobs to wiretaps to contracting stuff out to the media, and the media becomes the carriers of my message. It's all conducted under an executive order called EO 12333, which very few people talk about. And when people jump up and down and they say, why isn't anybody in jail yet? Well, here's part of the answer. These files, which are being exposed by Solomon and Kash Patel right now, are files which were hidden even from most people in the FBI. They were in a category called privileged access, and they were hidden in various SCIFs because most of these things are classified. They involve classified techniques, obviously, what I just told you. The FBI under 12333, or the CIA for that matter, can lie about the very existence of these organizations and who's actually involved. So this is a really big deal. We know about one of them, Crossfire Hurricane, which was actually Russiagate, which, if you think about it, carried forward through the Mueller investigation, which was a criminal investigation after they did all this illegal nonsense with the British, and the British actually triggered that. And so that went for literally the first 2 years of Trump's first term. Right after that, we had the Zelensky-Trump, telephone call, so-called, and the whole impeachment, because that was about Trump opening up the idea on that telephone call about the Biden family corruption. And that in turn generated an investigation in, basically starting in, we think, January of 2020, called Round River, most of which is still classified. And Kash Patel is right now going through to declassify it. But what that was the FBI office in Pittsburgh. The Attorney General asked them to take a look at Rudy Giuliani's information about the Biden family corruption. And somehow he assigned it to the FBI office in Pittsburgh, which had been deeply involved in the Mueller investigation of cyber crimes and everything else. All right. So the whole thing was kind of, what's Bill Barr doing here anyway? Why is he doing this? But then they turned it around and basically turned it into a dragnet against anybody who talked about, corruption of the Biden family and Ukraine corruption, going all the way up to the 2020 election, where you remember you had those 53 intelligence operatives essentially fabricating a thing which said the Hunter Biden laptop story is Russian disinformation. That's what this thing called Round River is about. And any journalist, any person who was actually talking about Russian corruption or Biden family corruption during that period was a target. They estimated targeted more than 400 people, and included Susie Wiles, and all sorts of really crazy illegalities. Then right after that, you had Arctic frost, which occurred after January 6th and after the electors were given by the Trump campaign to actually challenge the 2020 election. And what happened in Arctic frost is that they targeted for destruction the entire MAGA movement. They targeted for destruction over 400 political organizations, actually, supporting Donald Trump, and every major person actually supporting him, and ran that operation. Then you had another one called Plasmic Echo, which was about setting up the Mar-a-Lago raid. All these things involve extraordinary techniques, many of which are illegal under the Constitution. And if they go into a criminal investigation, I'm entitled under the Constitution and various procedures to actually say, okay, how much of this investigation is derived from all the nonsense you did prior to turning it into a criminal investigation? That has never worked. And that's why these techniques are very dangerous and should be outlawed. But that's really what these things are about. And it's explosive. And it's been driven off the front pages largely because it answers the question, how come nobody's in handcuffs yet? Well, if I hide the files, and not only that, and how come certain people haven't been fired, which is the other question? Well, some of them, are cooperating and showing us where the files are and who was actually operating and doing this. So we're making huge and significant progress. The next thing that's going to happen, and we'll get to that in terms of the Save America Act questions, is a explosive coming this week or next revelation about Chinese and other foreign government infiltration of our voting rolls with fake voters. And that's going to be coming up probably, they say at the end of this week or next week, involving Maricopa County in Arizona. So hold on to your seats, folks. This is really dramatic. It's really good. And it's going to result in one criminal case, which we know of, and total exposure of everything that actually has been working here.
Yeah, let me go ahead and just play that John Solomon clip for everyone right here.
Donald Trump and his supporters were targeted by 4 consecutive FBI codename counterintelligence investigations over the last decade. From the moment President Trump secured the nomination in the summer of 2016 to the moment he raised his hand for his second inauguration in January 2025, he was subjected to 4 straight consecutive counterintelligence probes, each of them designed to try to find some form of criminality against him. Each of them, or in total, they subjected hundreds of innocent Americans to privacy-invading tactics, things like their phone records being taken, grand jury subpoenas, extraordinary developments and intrusions on their everyday life. And the FBI, before Kash Patel came in, essentially treated the man twice elected president as a national security threat. That's what a counterintelligence investigation is. That means for almost the first 9 years of his career, the FBI only saw Donald Trump as a potential threat to national security.
So that
the
was
FBI
some of the
was
background.
the president of the United States was a threat to the state. And that's indeed the actual position of most of the intelligence community during that period. The president is a threat to the state. Really think about that.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. If you're on YouTube, please just give us a quick like. That sends a good signal to YouTube and helps increase our syndication. Thank you, everyone. Let me give a few quick shout out here. Thank you, Thomas. We need to get these 2 on Crowder. We would love to get on any show we can. If anyone has a connection to a producer or something and can get us on the show, please reach out to us through our email addresses, and we'd love to get on a big show like that. Dirty Harry, I heard that China stopped all military forces from doing any kind of practice raids on Taiwan since the opening shots on Iran by the U.S. military. China forces stood down, blackout in 1900 hours. Why? Any thoughts on? I heard something similar too, that China has stopped all of its military exercises near Taiwan. Any thoughts on that?
I just refer back to what we said at the outset, that obviously China is rethinking. I wouldn't want to go too far in terms of assessing China's military stance. I think you have a bit of a factional situation going on in China. I don't think any of us here want to stray too far into any analysis other than I think your assumption, Dirty Harry, is right. I think certainly the Xi Jinping government is very much assessing its position with Trump, whom Donald Trump keeps saying is my friend, someone I can talk to. And of course, he's got a state visit scheduled to China shortly. But in his Oval Office statements, I think 3 days ago, President Trump also made clear we want to keep. Let me just take a pause here. I've seen a lot of things saying the strait's not open, you were wrong, and so on. What we have said is that President Trump intends to use the power of the United States, both in terms of insurance and in terms of the Navy, to keep the straits open. But he's not going to be, an idiot and do it until you have a certain kind of military capability, both from the standpoint of degrading Iranian capabilities and our ability to actually truly defend the straits. I just wanted to mention that because I saw a lot of chat in the chat. But the president has made clear that his intention to get the strait open using all of these new weapons, like we ensure shipping ourselves if Lloyd's and the British don't want to do it, and using the Navy as needed. In this statement the other day, he made very clear China is much more dependent on oil coming through the strait than we are. And we're doing this for China and the rest of the world. We're defending China and the rest of the world from these lunatics. I think there are people in China who understand that.
Yup, the death cult in Iran. Hopefully we're finally entering a process where we don't have to keep dealing with these people that literally are trying to inflict terrorism on the rest of the world. I was just, I just had pulled up, just did a quick Google search on China. And yeah, China is saying, look, Iran, you cannot be striking your neighbors like that, right? That makes no sense at all, right here. This one right here, I just used this. In this regard, China does not go along with Iran's attacks against the states. And obviously it's going to say that the US and Israeli attacks on Iran aren't acceptable, right? That's to be expected. But the fact that they're telling Iran, like, hey, look, you can't keep attacking your neighbors. Thank you. So thank you, Dirty Harry. Joe, I have this other one. Joe Schmo. Musk should be awarded the Medal of Freedom for his work. He has put his life and business on the line. I cannot write enough about all the sacrifices he has made for all of America. I know all three of us here absolutely agree with that statement. Obviously, no one agrees with Musk on everyone. Okay. He has a long history of telling tall tales about various things. All right. That aside. Okay. Yes. As a billionaire, the fact that he pays the largest tax bill that's ever been paid in the United States by him repeatedly, right? Elon Musk, as a billionaire, to the fact that the left is pointing at him and saying, trying to degrade him. Oh, look what he's doing as a billionaire. He's one of the best examples of a billionaire you could ever make. Putting his fortune on the line to launch SpaceX. What an absolutely crazy, any quote normal thinking person would say, oh yeah, you're going to start your own space company and build your own rockets. Right. Think he actually did that. That's absolutely incredible. Right? Or even the electric car stuff, when that stuff first started, people were like, oh, electric cars. Now I'm legitimately looking at getting a Tesla. Legitimately, if not for the self-driving alone. So yes, I agree. Elon Musk it's a great example of what we should all strive towards. Be wealthy. We should all be striving towards being wealthier and accomplishing more with our wealth, something really amazing with our wealth. So yes, I agree. Elon Musk is an awesome person. And Girly Engineer, thank you so much for the super chat. Please make sure you're subscribed. Donna, God bless America. God bless President Donald J. Trump. Yes, we agree. And thank you again, PGEC. Do you think the Crown Prince will be the one who comes back to be in charge of the new Iran?
Well,
I don't think anyone,
President Trump has been asked this on a number of occasions, and it's very similar to his response on Venezuela when asked about Machado. You know, he said both about Machado and about the Crown Prince, they're very nice people. But I think it should be somebody from inside the country. That's obviously what happened in Venezuela. It's been extremely successful. You know, we've reestablished diplomatic relations with the Delcy Rodriguez government. The oil is flowing. It's going to help the people of Venezuela. So I think, and admittedly, Iran is a much more complicated situation than Venezuela is. But I think the president is very clear. You don't want some externally imposed regime change. Now, if the Iranian people decided that's who they wanted, that's a different story. You know, and I am not, you know, privy to public opinion on the ground in Iran. But I think Trump is very, very clear that, you know, imposing anything from the outside is not as preferable as an indigenous leader arising who can continue a certain amount of continuity in at least the civilian part of the government. Clearly, we don't want a lot of continuity with the IRGC, but that's not everybody who runs Iran. And I think he wants to keep intact some kind of capability so that the country doesn't descend into chaos.
Thank you, Susan. And thank you, friend, for your question, for joining us every week. Okay, I got a few more questions that just came in by Super Chat, but I'm going to jump back to the questions that we got from our newsletter. So, whoops, wrong one. There we go. Thank you. So this is a question that we've been getting a lot too. So thank you, Catherine. What can we say to those who think that the amount, so the amount of money, I think, was like $11.3 billion. I think that number came out yesterday or something. The Department of Defense told Congress that, I believe, people are going to fact check me, I'm sure. We've spent approximately $11.3 billion on this 13-day war so far. So some background. What can we say to those who think that the amount of money spent in the Iran altercation would be better used to pay down our debt or used for things at home? Thank you, Barbara and Susan.
Well, you know, basically you have to think about what Trump is doing overall in terms of the national security strategy. The Middle East was not supposed to be a major priority here, and he didn't intend for it to be such. But we're faced with a situation in which you've got a death cult actually trying to get a nuclear weapon, and you can see from what's gone on in this war so far exactly the danger that they are as a terrorist threat to the country. So it's not a war of choice as people would like to portray it. It's a necessity for our national security, period. And for the security of all of our allies in the Gulf, who have given us, just so you know, a vast amount of money from their sovereign wealth funds to invest in the United States of America to pay down the debt. All right, it's exactly that answer by Trump to the debt question, and with tariffs and everything else, which he's doing to revive the economy, which is the only way you're ever going to repay the debt and put the economy on a sound footing when it is expanding. Its productivity is expanding. Workers are making more money in wages right now than they have in a very, very, very long time, because the working class and the middle class was crushed by the Obama-Biden model, the British model, for having, you know, the aristocracy and their retainers run things versus the American system, which is what Trump is implementing, where, as he says, how much a worker makes and the expansion of working class wages and productivity is the central basis for actually creating this economy. So the answer is no. You know, wars happen. The state of the world when we came in here, that when Trump came in, was horrendous. And you had a Middle East, which you see right now, how critical it is to the overall economy of the world itself and to our economy. You had a Middle East, which was on the edge of massive instability, despite Trump's best efforts. And what's that all about, really? I mean, the Middle East is like the crossroads of the entire world. It's where you could go if you're thinking about the future as opposed to being locked into the present, where you could go to actually allow for African development. Huge, huge major factor in the world, jointly with your Arab neighbors in the Middle East and with Japan. Big deal for actually increasing our productivity and exporting our goods and products. So again, the issue is you're kind of not thinking in the right paradigm, so to speak. You're not thinking in this idea that Trump actually has for reviving the entire economy on a completely different basis.
Yeah, and I'd also look at it from another standpoint. You know, think of how much blood and treasure we've spent over the past 4 or 5 decades because of British instigated wars in the Mideast. This is not going to stop until we shut it down at its source. And that is what I think Donald Trump is doing at this point. Is he going to pay a price politically? We don't know how quickly this is going to resolve, how it's going to come out. You know, but he was willing to risk whatever that is, recognizing that it was time once and for all to bring actual peace, economic development, and stability to that region of the world.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan. I actually want to give a quick shout out here. You know, people always ask, is the White House listening to us? They actually went and did something that we started to do like a year ago. They just put this up a few months ago where they started listing all of the investments that Trump was actually organizing to come into the United States. I don't know how often this is updated, but this is different. I think this is different than when they first launched it. I don't know when they last updated it. But you can see here how Trump has actually organized not just these companies to reinvest back into the United States, but as Barbara was saying, these sovereign wealth funds, especially in the Arab states, the UAE, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, all three making massive investments from their own national sovereign wealth into the United States economy. So, but this is more than just that here. It goes through and shows all the kinds of deals that have been made to bring investment back to the United States, including what kind of industry it's in, even these ones that, you know, seem small compared to the ones at the top, just the variety and the amount of companies here from all different industries that the Trump administration has organized to reinvest their dollars back into this American productive process is really amazing. So you can just Google search for White House investments. I think they also have it right here on the top of their website, but you can go to White House investments and you'll see here 9.9 trillion in private and sovereign wealth fund investments into the United States. That's pretty impressive. Okay. Let's circle back to the super chats here because the next set of questions are going to be really good. So let me just give some more shout outs here. So this person asked something that I know we all want so bad. Sus, thank you very much for your question. I would like to hear when Barack Hussein Obama is arrested. Barbara, any thoughts on this? You know, we get questions, we get stuff like this all the time. When is so-and-so going to be arrested? When is so-and-so going to be put in jail? It's just this common thing that people just get in their head. They just say. But how do you address these kinds of things that people just say to us all the time? Because we all want Barry to be behind bars. We all do.
Well, the problem is, first of all, he's immune under our Constitution for all practical impacts for being arrested for anything he did while president. That's been kind of worked out in the courts over a period of time. I just think it's imperative that people recognize that the criminal justice system is not built for stopping an insurrection. The military is, the public are, and most of the times in history where we've had great changes, it's because the American people have actually rallied behind a certain perspective after it got exposed. Just think about, what happened to get the original Glass-Steagall bill passed in history after the financial collapse in the 30s. You had a guy by the name of, Pecora, who was a prosecutor by trade, but actually was appointed by the Congress to reveal to the people in really great hearings exactly how J.P. Morgan and everybody else had rigged the system to destroy the republic. And what happened was there was genuine public outrage, which actually created the basis for Congress to have to actually pass that legislation, which said, essentially, we'll never bail out Wall Street with the funds of the government of the United States again. What's lacking right now, in my humble opinion, is an understanding of what's involved in a criminal prosecution. You have to be able to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. You can't be doing it in a jurisdiction which is poisoned by insurrectionist judges, like in Alexandria, Virginia, or Washington, D.C., which are the two jurisdictions you could bring a criminal indictment in. Essentially what's happening is that they're going to do a criminal indictment, I'm very convinced, in Florida under the Ku Klux Klan Act, which is, a very old conspiracy statute dating from the Civil War. And ironically and wonderfully, it was the actual statute which was used to imprison Klan members for running an insurrection against the United States. They're going to do that around the entire Russiagate hoax. And Barack Hussein Obama, I have a firm belief, will be thoroughly discredited when that prosecution is actually brought. But you've got to actually take the responsibility on the model I just outlined of a republic taking your obligations as a citizen very seriously and figuring out, okay, let's problem solve some of these things. Why can't we bring criminal prosecutions in other jurisdictions than Washington, D.C., or, basically in the Eastern District of Virginia for crimes that occur in Washington, D.C.? These crimes all occurred, obviously, in Washington, D.C. Can we modify them for an insurrection against the government? That's something Congress could look at. It's an interesting idea. But right now we're trapped by the present law, and we're trapped very much by the present Congress, half of which are not even on Trump's page, the Democrats, and quite a few Republicans, particularly in the Senate, are in the same kind of framework. That can change if people become active. I reference the Save America Act, where we're running that type of campaign right now, a massive campaign in the population to get this thing passed. The roadblock is very clear in the Senate. And what's going to happen is the government is going to be releasing stuff that actually is irrefutable about how the voter rolls have been jerry-rigged to create the massive fraud we saw in 2020. That will become something that people have to take up once it's released, but it's something which will drag into the sunlight all of the senators who actually oppose this for any reason at all, including Chuck Schumer. So that's the idea I'd leave people with about that.
Yeah, I just add one other aspect to this, because we read as many of the comments as we possibly can on our YouTube videos and X accounts and otherwise. And I really want to ask people who are so emotionally invested in this, I'm not going to do anything until I see arrests. I'm not going to vote. I'm abandoning Donald Trump until I see arrests. You're putting an enormous amount of energy and emotion and passion into something which, as Barbara just explained, you have no actual control over. Hold on a second. You're dealing with institutions that that are still largely compromised by the enemy. And I think you have to ask yourself the question, why am I not putting my emotional energy and my passions into something that I actually can do something about? I have my phone on mute on airport and it's still coming through, sorry. Why don't you put your passion into something you can do something about, which is to make sure that we win the midterm elections, to make sure that that Donald Trump actually begins to get a Congress which will assist him in getting U.S. attorneys, judges, and other people who can help us move forward in these fronts. So, you know, the amount of emotional energy that people spend on, I'm pissed until somebody gets arrested, frankly befuddles me, when I think we should be putting our emotional energy into actually changing the political landscape in this country. And right now, we are not that many months away from a decisive election, which is going to determine whether or not our situation gets better or gets immeasurably worse.
Yeah, it's going to be the impeachment of Donald Trump yet again. It's going to be terrible. Thank you, Sus, for your honest question. And I'm good. Okay, so first off, before I continue to the next question here, our Carney, our X.com person who manages X.com, is telling us that there's a huge back and forth right now. I know I woke up this morning and checked my X. It was all over X. The bombing of the girls' school. I think this has become a news headline. You have a whole bunch of people discussing it on X.com. But before I do that, I want to get to another issue that, again, this next issue. So let me pull it up here. I'm going to roll this in with two questions we got, but I think they'll make a lot of sense together. So thank you, Girly Engineer. Do you think anyone in President Trump's administration is undermining him? We've heard questions about his chief of staff, Susie Wiles, and Deputy AG Todd Blanche. Okay, I'm going to kick it up a notch because that's more than just those two. I swear it's almost everyone. JD Vance. What about Scott Bessent? What about basically the whole administration? Does Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's ties to George Soros cause you any concerns, even though it seems he is doing what's best for the American economy? Thank you, Charlene, for being honest. And I'm going to take this other one here again on Bessent. Okay, hi, love your discussion. So very informative. Can you do one focused on the new financial structure being worked out on by Secretary Bessent? There is a lot of chatter out on it, but I'm not yet understanding how this will affect us. Okay, so there is still a lot of questions about the motivations of Trump's cabinet, including Scott Bessent and his intentions, Chief of Staff AG Todd Blanche. Barbara, what do you say to these people?
You're in the wrong universe. You know, look, these are attacks being directed by an outside agency, namely the British intelligence services, the NATO intelligence services, everybody who is in a life and death battle right now with our country in terms of whose system is going to prevail in the actual worldwide war, which Donald Trump has actually implemented. The easiest thing to do from an operational sense in terms of any organization is to begin to sow dissent within the organization itself. This one, if you're a political organization, this one's an informant. This one's basically not on board with the leader's policies. This one is doing this, this one is doing that. I will just say that I think that Trump's cabinet this time around is the most unified cabinet I've ever seen, including support of the president's agenda, even when they don't necessarily agree with all of it. All right. They're basically fighting like crazy on his page, recognizing that he's a unique leader in human history. Was Scott Bessent really tied to George Soros's cause or to George Soros himself? He worked for the Soros organization, that's true. And he did so as a financial analyst, implementing, certain policies in place for the Open Society Group, not for the Open Society Group, but for basically George Soros's stock portfolio. In the course of that, he came to understand economics that goes on in markets better than probably anyone currently around. As he says, he's bet repeatedly on Wall Street against every single one of the premier financial houses, including Soros's own in later lives, and learned that he could master the market better than they could. When he was brought in, Trump asked him one question: how do I actually do this drastic shift that I'm talking about of implementing a whole new system without Wall Street turning around and actually crashing the system, because their importance is going to be taken out of the major metric that runs the economy. As Bessent keeps emphasizing, it is Main Street's turn to get major credit to build. And that's the emphasis in short form that the president is pushing. And as he said yesterday, Scott has a remarkable capacity to calm the markets from freaking out. And that's kind of the dangerous side of this, which you see with the oil panic, which is going on right now. It has a certain basis, which is China's not getting oil out of the Straits of Hormuz. But why is that driving the price up in America, or by OPEC, or by all these other places, by the huge margins it is? That's where the speculative side of the market actually comes in. The London side of the market actually comes into operation. So that's how I'd answer your question. I think most of this is just blackpilling the Trump supporters, essentially saying, oh my God, this one or that one or the other one is a snake. It's the same thing that happened in the first administration. And we know it happened in the first administration, but do you really think Trump is that stupid that he's going to repeat that? That's, really not what's happening here.
Yeah, in the first administration, Trump fired people, because they were leaking, they were opposed to his policy. He's admitted, he basically had to go to the establishment. He didn't, he didn't have a bench in his first administration. He spent 4 years between his first administration and his second administration building a bench and picking people who were loyal to him. Ask yourself one question first. Have you seen leaks from this administration? No. This administration is tamped down harder than any administration I've ever seen in my lifetime, which means, the people in this administration do not have another agenda. But Adam, I'd actually, given sort of where the chat and a lot of other things are going, I want to bring up the question of our midterm boot camp at this point, because I try not to get irritated, but I have to say, all this Monday morning quarterbacking in terms of this person's no good, that person's no good. Look, if somebody is out there aggressively, actively organizing politically for the midterms, I will give you my own personal permission to complain. If you're not, then, maybe you might, again, want to take stock of where your emotions are. So, Adam, could we share the screen? I think it's really important for us to move to the kind of action aspect of what our movement does. Obviously, we analyze, and our YouTube reach is really quite enormous now, because I think people appreciate what we bring to the world, our ability to put the pieces together. But we also organize. We have 2 organizations. Promethean Action is what hosts our YouTube shows and does this analysis and provides you with the daily newsletter. Promethean PAC is our political arm. in the United States, if you are going to directly intervene into the electoral process on behalf of candidates or even in opposition to candidates, you have to be a registered federal election committee. And that is what our Promethean PAC is. What we have been doing since the beginning of this year is conducting a bi-weekly midterm boot camp. If you go to Promethean PAC, which you see there on the screen, you will see up in the upper right-hand corner, midterm boot camp, and you can sign up for that. Every 2 weeks, and we may accelerate the pace of this as we get closer to the midterms, we have a dialogue with hundreds and hundreds of activists all over the country. Some of them are candidates. Most of them are just busy organizing their friends and neighbors around the fact that Donald Trump is indeed carrying out both an economic and a strategic revolution. We've provided material for people to organize with as part of our midterm boot camp. This is a half-page flyer which outlines the fact that the president is carrying out an economic revolution. We entitled it President Trump's Republican New Deal because he actually used that phrase in the Oval Office. And we think it's a very polemical concept because it kind of takes people out of, the right-left framework that too many people want to think about. And on the backside of this half-page flyer is the scorecard as of when we produced this, which was about a month and a half ago, of what the president is already doing to bring about this dramatic shift in the U.S. economy in terms of investment, in terms of capabilities starting up that we haven't built in the United States for 30 or 40 or 50 or 70 years, coming back to life because of this investment, and in terms of the fact that this administration is taking on the health insurance cartel, the meat cartels, the banking cartels who are trying to buy up single-family houses, and on and on and on. So, rather than people sitting there and complaining about what the president allegedly isn't doing on some scorecard that they've created, here's what the administration is doing. And here's what the majority of the non-traditional Republican Party voters, like the blue-collar workers, the young blacks in urban communities who shifted significantly for Trump, especially young black men, this is what they're interested in. And this is what's going to motivate them to come out and vote for MAGA candidates in the primaries and in the midterms. This is what the fight is about. This is what the British imperial system has been trying to stop for over 250 years. They use war, they use terrorism, they use psychological warfare. They do not want the United States to be a strong, independent manufacturing superpower in a world of other strong, sovereign, independent nations. That's how you get peace in the world. So I think it's extremely important for people to, again, take a certain kind of emotional, checklist of where their passion is and where their activity is, and ask yourself, am I doing something which is within my power to go out and organize my friends, neighbors, other American citizens? There's Adam is showing where you sign up for the boot camp. And then we also have a boot camp resources page where all of our previous videos are available. It's upcoming on Friday because a lot of us have state party conventions on March 27th, which is when we would have our subsequent boot camp. We're actually going to do 2 weeks in a row. But I really encourage people to sign up for the boot camp here in the United States. We've got slides, we've got resources, both printer friendly. That's a slideshow we used, a lot of resources. So, I really encourage people to start thinking actively and not passively in terms of the fight before us.
Yep. It's as simple as put effort into the things you can control rather than things you can't. and that requires you to be a little bit realistic about where everyone is in life. Thank you, everyone. Check out PrometheanPact.com. Sign up for the midterm boot camp if you're really interested. We're going to help you. We know how hard it is. I organized on the street for over 10 years of my life as a daily street organizer. I know how hard it is to get started talking about. That's ultimately what a good political organizer is able to talk about incredibly challenging ideas in a very as calmly as possible. I think Charlie Kirk was a very good example of it. And I know how hard it is not to get worked up in the heat of the moment. I know how hard it is, but you have, if you really want to have an impact on the world, you have to know how to present challenging ideas to people that don't necessarily want to hear them. And you don't necessarily want to hear their garbage ideas either. So you have to learn how to actually have this dialogue process. And that's one of the things that I think is a great takeaway for everyone who joins this midterm boot camp.
Yeah,
So
I want to just highlight one chat. Tint D. No, I mean, they're being ironic. No, I'd rather complain and not vote. Rolling on the floor laughing. Thank you.
So thank you, everyone. And we're going to continue. So
Actually, I want to bring up one more thing.
Okay.
I saw a suggestion. I think this would be a great bumper sticker. Republicans who don't vote elect Democrats.
So I reposted that. I saw that somebody made I saw that on x.com. I reposted it. But yes, I agree. That was bouncing around on X quite a bit. That would be an easy one to make too. Okay. So thank you, everyone. If you're watching on YouTube, please drop us a like. Thank you for joining us on x.com and give us a reshare. Okay. So the next set of questions are going to be another fan favorite. I'm going to start. Thank you, everyone, for the super chats. I have so many super chats here. I'm going to try and get through as many of them as I can. This next one, thank you, Mike Oliveira, for this one. And I'm gonna bring in two questions here from our newsletter. Okay, so Mike, thank you for being honest. Is Israel a nuclear threat in the Middle East? Thank you. And then I'm gonna pull up this one here. Hold on, let me just pull up this next one here. Whoops. There we go. Thank you, Zindram. Where does Israel and Netanyahu sit in this conflict? And why are you supporting a war in which president has been dragged into by Bibi Netanyahu? Thank you, Mohammed, for your question. So I think these are some very good questions, representative of what we get asked all the time. So what's Israel's role in this? Are they a nuclear threat?
They're a nuclear threat if they don't have any options. If they think the state of Israel is going to be destroyed, they are a nuclear threat. They have a nuclear bomb. That is something strategically you have to take into account. And I don't think people who are actually trying to be armchair generals here think about that situation very, very much. Because they're not really familiar with how dire the situation in the Middle East actually is in terms of people who have hated each other for centuries, in being engaged in a religious war, which we're in the process of actually solving. So yes, is the answer to your question, but you've got to caveat it by actually saying that. And, taking it into account if you're sitting in the president's shoes as a strategic, calculation. Second, between Trump and Bibi, is there any room? The answer is yes. And people who actually, are saying that Trump is being dragged to this by Bibi Netanyahu are not familiar with the president's own stance regarding Iran going back years. He has always said Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, period, way, way, way back when he was a private citizen and had nothing to do with Bibi Netanyahu whatsoever. Third, you don't understand the whole strategy of the Abraham Accords, which is the only damn chance that's been put forward by anyone to create peace in the Middle East for centuries, really, when you're looking at the whole history of the thing. You've now got a situation in which, because Trump gave certain concessions in his first term to Israel, he is more popular in Israel itself than Bibi Netanyahu. That gives you, in terms of deal making, what is called leverage. All right. And, no, he didn't get dragged into this by Bibi Netanyahu, nor by that crazy man and offensive personality called Lindsey Graham. He basically got into it from the standpoint of looking at the overall strategic situation after October 7th, looking at what October 7th was designed to do, which was to blow up his Abraham Accords by Hamas, funded by Iran. Those are all facts, accurate facts about how you look at a situation like this. The idea that Trump is getting dragged around by anybody is pretty ridiculous, because it's pretty clear he is his own man and has been so. And the very fact that nobody controls him is the very reason they've tried to assassinate him at least 3 or 4 times. They have to control the situation. They don't control Trump. There is a lot of difference in the strategies towards this war between Israel and the United States. Bibi Netanyahu and the Israelis would like very much for a regime change operation to take place in Iran, even if it's like the traditional regime change operations, which haven't worked in the Middle East because of the whole complexity of the situation. Donald Trump doesn't want to do that at all. He wants basically to completely degrade the Iranians' capacity to wage terror in the world, period. That's his war aim. He's hoping, in turn, that will create the room for the Iranian people to actually emerge from that. Will that happen? Looking at the overall situation and thinking about what people in Iran must be feeling when the new Ayatollah and the IRGC have just issued a new alert to them saying, if you come out into the streets, you will be shot. I don't know about you, but unless I saw a whole army around me, I wouldn't be coming out into the streets because I would get shot. So, that's the complex issue we're actually dealing with here if you're sitting in the shoes of the President of the United States. He will exit, I believe, when he has achieved that military objective and not do what Bibi Netanyahu is asking for, which is a complete regime change operation. Israel itself, I think, is also backing down on that. I saw an admission today actually saying, well, we really didn't have a plan for regime change. You don't, because there is no plan for regime change in a complicated society like Iran, except for the Iranian people to feel safe enough to control their own destinies. And, we may end up coming back to this situation because we're dealing with a cancer here, which is pretty resilient. So that's how I'd answer the question.
Yeah, I'll also point out there was a piece in Axios by the very well-sourced Barak Ravid 2 days ago that the Trump administration sent, I believe, both Kushner and Witkoff to Israel after Israel bombed the refinery right outside of Tehran to tell them stop. Because, as Barbara said, there have been 2 different intentions. Trump wants to take out the IRGC and the mullahs and allow Iran to rebuild itself and become a stable, prosperous nation again. There are obviously people in Israel who want to wipe the whole thing off the face of the earth and cripple it. And Trump has been very clear, you're just going to end up with more chaos. I'd also add one other thing. Just look at the list of neocons and how totally unhappy they are right now about the way Trump is prosecuting this, because it is not from the standpoint of either Greater Israel or the neocon regime change playbook.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Susan. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in the chat. We have so many super chats here. I am going to try and get to them. So let me take this one here from God Bless America. Ron Chapman has been talking about the praxis. Would love your look into this. 151 Elon Theo, JD Ron says their top meeting in Greenland. Do you ladies know anything about this? No. Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you very much for the super chat. There's just so much on the internet, so many people saying things. We can't follow everything. Thank you very much for joining us. Proud Graham, I love your show from Canada. Would love your take on Carney and what he is doing to our country.
Well, if you follow my and Barbara's videos, Mark Carney is one of our favorite punching bags. I mean, it doesn't get any better than a man who has been who has been the head of two different central banks, Canada and the Bank of England. He's obviously there's nothing he's doing which is going to help Canada. He is in office to try and figure out how to come up with some kind of counter strategic configuration to what Donald Trump is doing to the world. You know, he's been the most outspoken in terms of the rupture that Trump has created, that the post-war rules-based liberal free trade order is over, you know, and how can we somehow pivot to try and put something in its place? So, you know, the sooner the Canadian people develop real leadership within their own country who will actually represent the interests of Canada, the better off we'll all be.
Thank you. Also, a shout out here to PGK. Thank you for joining us every week. Great job as usual. Love your perspective and your teaching ability. Great information. Also love your midterm boot camp. Thank you for joining us on the midterm boot camp. We're also working to build something even longer lasting for Promethean Pat, which everyone's going to find out about soon. All right, and I'm going to use this question here to transition into a set of questions that I've been thinking about more frequently, which is, how is Iran going to play out in the midterm elections, which I think is actually very interesting when you think about it. So let's take a look at these questions here. First one here is from Tracy. Which is the best for MAGA in the midterms if you had to choose one? Passing the Save America Act or a reasonably successful result in Iran? I believe the Save America Act is more important, but it's a close call. Thank you, Tracy, for your question and observation. And here's one from Jack. How do you think Trump's actions in Iran will impact the midterm elections? Thank you, Jack, and thank you, Tracy, for the question. So Barbara and Susan, your thoughts. How is this going to play out into the midterms? What's the best scenario?
Well, the best scenario, obviously, is that we have a reasonably successful result in Iran and we pass the Save America Act. The president, in his speeches over the past week, has been telling the Republican Party, you're idiots. You're idiots if you don't pass the Save America Act. If you pass it, we're going to take the midterms. So he's had a couple other wedge social issues to it, including the trans issue and men and women's sports, etc. Those are kind of, critical things which people are running on. But, I'm going to go outside the box here. I think the most important issue is that people understand the American system of economy and what Trump is trying to do with the economy. I don't think that, I think that obviously if there's a major impact and we don't get control of prices on energy, that's going to be a problem because it drives everything else up. And otherwise, we were headed in a very, very positive kind of trajectory here. But, if people feel it ahead of the midterms, and, I think that the administration right now is saying, this is the impact of this is going to fade before it has a substantial impact on the midterms. That's the perspective. And that in turn entails the idea that we're not going to have a long war going into the midterms. Obviously, the enemies of our nation recognize that in London. And their entire play here is to drive Iran into doing the types of things which will create a strategic quagmire for us. I think that Trump has every intention of avoiding those quagmires, but if you ask where that price is coming from, it's coming from the City of London, Wall Street's agents in the City of London, like J.P. Morgan Chase, who, Bessent basically called out by name last week. It's coming from all the people from the old system who think, I'm going to capitalize on this and put Trump in a box. And they're out to destroy you. Don't kid yourself who the target is here. You're the target if they succeed. So, I basically think you got to get outside that box and think about, how do I communicate what Trump is trying to do here? Not just in Iran, but more importantly with the American economy, to all of the people out there who I got to organize and get on board with this. If people understand the thrust of everything he said, the American worker and the middle class are my targets. In everything I do, I will defend them. I will fight for you. Not Wall Street, not the City of London, not everybody who's robbed you and controlled you for the last 50 years. That's the message we've got to get across to the population.
Yeah, but I have to say, Tracy, I'm kind of with you. It's a really close call, and obviously we don't know what the end game is. We don't know how quickly this situation in Iran is going to resolve. It's a war. But the Save America Act is incredibly important, because I think I just want to say there's three elements people have to think about in terms of midterm elections. Midterms are different than general elections. The first thing you have to do in midterms is you have to get your base out. That is hard, especially what are called low propensity Republican voters. Do you know that the majority of hunters don't vote? Do you think hunters want Democrats? Do you know that the majority of evangelical Christians don't vote? Do you think they want the crazy Democrats, mutilating children and putting boys in girls' bathrooms? So, the first layer in the midterms is making sure that those people who already are on our side in terms of values get off their rear ends and go out and vote. The second is the new layers that came in, like blue-collar workers, urban minorities, and others who voted for President Trump, and make sure that, as Barbara said, they're clear on the fact that he is delivering on this economic revolution. You don't just snap your fingers, though, and have the plants spring up overnight. And then the third element, Tracy, which you brought up, is the Save America Act, because if we can cut out that layer of fraud, we are like an order of magnitude closer to being able to do what we need to do.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan. And thank you also to this other Susan. Thank you, Suzanne. I am so grateful I found you, and tell everyone that I know should follow Promethean action. Thank you, Suzanne. We can't do any of this without the support of our viewers and our readers. We've been able to grow over the last year since we've made a splash on the internet and social media. One of the big reasons why we've been able to grow is because of supporters like yourself. Please make sure everyone on the call, if you're watching on X or YouTube, please, we have a free newsletter. We just passed 120,000 subscribers on our email newsletter.
And we're on our way to 500,000 on YouTube.
Yes, we're on our way to 500,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is absolutely a crazy number. I know there are plenty of accounts that are in the tens of millions of subscribers, but I don't think we ever thought we were going to be here. Please, everyone, make sure you're subscribed to our free newsletter. We're planning out making some improvements to it, but that's a best way for us to stay in contact with you outside of the control of YouTube and the other social networks. Email is still the best way. So please, everyone, the link is in the description. You can search for Promethean Action. Sign up to our free newsletter. The link is right there. Also, Nia Opsis, a client, turned me on to the channel recently. It's now one of my top news sources, and I recommended you to everyone I know. God bless you all. God bless you, Nia Opsis. Please make sure you get our free newsletter. Seriously. Thank you. We have so many more. Okay. What do we want to cover? Domestic issues or something international?
Why don't you grab a domestic?
Okay, let's see here. Let's go with actually something I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but an earlier thing, but I think we can bring it up today. So again, this is on the question of indictments, and maybe we could circle back to what we were talking about earlier. Do you think we can trust Kash Patel? Why are we not seeing any arrests or indictments? Thank you, Anna. This is a question we get all the time from our newsletter supporters and from our YouTube viewership in the comments. So, Barbara, Kash Patel, why are we not seeing indictments?
Well, here's what's happening, folks. We tried to indict Comey in Washington, D.C. Basically that went nowhere because the judges are all on the other side. We tried to do that 3 times, by the way. Basically what happened was we then shifted it over to the Eastern District of Virginia and tried it there. We tried to indict Tish James. The grand jury in Virginia wouldn't even forward the indictment, all right, because people have TDS. So let's get real. Let's really think about this. What we need to be able to do is expose this totally, which is what Kash Patel is doing. Just like I gave you the example of the Pecora Commission. You need to get your facts straight. You need basically not just say, oh, I know all this already. You need to think about what's actually being said here. You need to think about the role of the United States Senate and the House in Russiagate the first time around. They were all on their knees basically trying to subvert the president. Where are we in terms of our government right now? Yes, Kash Patel is running. Why do I trust Kash Patel? Well, if you saw what Tulsi Gabbard released, the actual unclassified House Intelligence Committee report about Russiagate, you'll see the mind of Kash Patel because he was the lead investigator for Devin Nunes and put all of that together. What did it do? It showed exactly what I've been talking about when I talk about a counterintelligence operation. What was involved in Russiagate? It involved the press working for the deep state. It involved various organizations in Washington, D.C. that were allegedly private organizations like George Soros's Open Society Foundation, a Eurasia Desk, all right? That's all in that House report, which because it was so thorough, it was suppressed, locked up in the CIA, and never really, the House investigators went over there, they got into the CIA, but Gina Haspel sat on that report and refused to actually have it released, locked it up in a safe, in fact. That all got released through Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel. And, the reason that there was a Mar-a-Lago raid was because they thought Trump had that damn report and they wanted to steal it and basically get rid of it forever. So this is a fight, all right, a knife fight within the bureaucracy of Washington, D.C. And so far, what's happening, I'm not pleased with certain things that Pam Bondi has done, but hey, that's just my personal opinion. I'm sitting on the sidelines. I know from doing legal cases and criminal cases how complex things are and why you make decisions which you never anticipated you would be making based on how things actually develop. It's a form of warfare, and you can't predict what's going on any given day. You're improvising and creating your conditions of warfare each and every day. I trust Kash to actually do that, since he did it, with against the gravest kind of operations thrown at him with Devin Nunes on the House Intelligence Committee back during Russiagate. So that's the basis for my trust. So far, he hasn't actually shown me anything different.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay, let's go to this other question we get all the time. Thank you, Big Wave, for you. Why won't the White House call out London and the British Empire outright? Wouldn't that illuminate the scope and the reasons for Trump's action and open more discussion on the historical basis for the same? Thank you, Big Wave.
I mean, I think in a sense they're doing it. Look, Barbara, Adam, and I, for decades, have been, holding up a big sign. It's the British. It's the British. It's the British. And while a precious small minority of the population figured it out along with us, it really was a small minority. I think what the president has done in this administration is by moving very strategically against British interests without saying so. He talks about how he, he's always praising these figures and of course how much he loves Britain because his mother came from there and so on. That's pure Donald Trump. But what has he done? He's forced the British themselves to come out in opposition of the United States. I think that's much more valuable than standing there and pointing at something, which you claim is happening. Make it happen. So when Trump launched the attack on Iran, the British did not allow us to use their bases. They're opposed to it. Carney, is now, who is also basically speaking on behalf of the British, is saying we don't have anything to do with this. We're wondering how it's going to end and so on. So what is happening is it's being demonstrated in real time. And then, once the British came out, denied us the bases, stood on the sidelines, essentially attacked what the president is doing, then the president said, oh, Great Britain, our former closest ally, because everybody could then see it. So I think that's the way he operates. We operate in a different way. We take you deep into history. We take you deep into principles, so that you can view this from that kind of standpoint. I think the way President Trump operates is exactly what he did to the Democrats in the State of the Union message. How many speeches has he basically called them crazy? But then in the State of the Union message, he showed the entire nation they're crazy. And I think that has, a magnified effect in terms of people's understanding where they, in a sense, discover it for themselves.
Yeah, I just add, you have to look at the speeches in 2 years in succession by J.D. Vance and then by Marco Rubio at the Munich Security Conference. That is the central organizing forum for the modern British financial empire in terms of its military and in terms of its intelligence community. And in both cases, we said, you guys are screwed. You basically, don't have your act together. You're crazy in terms of the war in Ukraine. You're crazy in terms of what you're doing to your own citizens through the totalitarian state you're setting up of 100% censorship, arresting people for thought crimes, having mass immigration, so forth and so on. We're out of here as the central focus of our foreign or other policies. And I thought that was pretty much a declaration of where we're going. We're orienting right now to the Pacific, and we're orienting right now to our own hemisphere. And either Europe and the British get it together, or, we're done with them, period. And I think that's been very, very clear.
Thank you. And I'd like to give a shout out here to David Lambert, because I think this question follows up very well. Thank you for your videos on the city of London and the Iran regime. Right, Londonistan. Personally, I have a sense of outrage that our supposed ally has been sticking it to us. Would love to hear your thoughts. Well, this has been an ongoing thing with London actually being the center of Islamic terrorism. It has a nickname, Londonistan.
And of course, you just had the revelation. Well, this actually came out in January, but by Bloomberg. It was a year-long investigation, but obviously it has a certain amount of relevance to today, which is that the new supreme leader of Iran, Mojtaba Khamenei, through a front man, has got enormous financial and real estate holdings in London. So this is not new. You know, we tracked something similar with Saudi Arabia and the Al Yamama deal and the British royal family back a couple of decades ago. President Trump pretty much read the riot act to Saudi Arabia in his first term and said, cut it out in terms of supporting Islamic fundamentalism. But Britain has continued to basically safe house the funds and the capabilities of many terrorist groups, including this sort of current regime in Iran.
I think another factor here, which is shown by the new Ayatollah's London holdings, is important to consider in terms of how the British actually operate, which is, remember that all of these countries in the Middle East used to be, for the most part, British or French colonies, under the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And, what they have done is invite the elites to be educated in London, at which point they profile them and figure out, essentially, how can I get this guy? How can I develop a blackmail file on this guy? What are his sexual proclivities? What are his educational fallacies? How does his mind work? And how can I attract him, most of all, to dumping all of his corrupt funds, if indeed he is corrupted? And that's what London counts on. They say that we can corrupt your elites. All right, that's been a central, feature of British foreign policy for centuries. And the basic idea is we get you to land all your funding in the city of London from your corrupt proceeds, and now we got you. That's our control point over you. Jeffrey Epstein is a piker in terms of how this arrangement actually works. So I'd like to point that out also, because it's a major factor in all of this stuff.
I was going to pull up the Bloomberg article, but people just search. We put it in the show yesterday, but if you just search for Bloomberg, Iran, new Ayatollah London homes, you're going to find it. So once again, London lets international terror networks fundraise in their country. Absolutely crazy. Thank you very much, David. Please make sure you get our free newsletter. Okay, so next question here. This is something that was coming up a lot. What's the real story with this? It's funny because China came out and is kind of solidified its position too. What's the real story concerning Russia helping Iran with identifying targets? That was a big psyop a few days ago. They were trying to put a wedge between Russia and the United States. Barbara, any thoughts on this one in particular?
Well, it is basically BS, but it emerged as soon as Scott Bessent said that we're going to allow sanctions to be lifted on Indian oil that is Russian source, so that India can fill its refineries. And we will probably, he told Larry Kudlow, we'll probably do more in terms of lifting the sanctions on Russian oil, which of course floods the world with supply at that point, and also creates a major dilemma for Iran. Are they going to hit Russian tankers in the Straits of Hormuz? Think about that. That's an interesting conundrum, isn't it? I also think that Putin has offered to help, given his longstanding ties to the Iranian leadership. There was a meeting, little noticed, in Florida, I think yesterday or the day before, with Kirill Dmitriev, who's the Russian peace envoy for Ukraine and other issues. And I think there's going to be some interesting developments, I would suspect, around Russia's involvement in this thing over the next 24 to 72 hours. So that was basically a story of trying to set up another Russiagate type of thing to get in the way of what the United States is actually trying to do.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay, I'm going to jump back to some super chats. This first one, thank you, Tudor, for being honest. But we'll just answer this briefly. Any truth to certain military leaders telling the troops that the reason they are fighting is to bring back the second coming of Christ? I watched Nino interview a gentleman that made this claim. I'm sorry, I can't believe this. Barbara and Susan, your thoughts on this? We get questions like this all the time too.
Looks to me like one of these black pill claims feeding off of what is intended to start and has been a religious war in the MAGA movement of the United States between Jews and Muslims and Christians. All right, you got to be very alert to that because that is really a kind of deepening thread here. And we don't need that in the MAGA movement. We're pretty firm about where we stand in terms of being a open camp for every good-willed religion. There's obviously zealots in every religion. I saw something like this saying that the new Ayatollah of Iran is telling his people that the reason why they're fighting is to bring back the end times. All right. So you get these apocalyptic visions, you know, in these situations as major cyber operations all the time.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you very much. How about this one? This is another thing that's on people's minds. Thank you, Guitar Ward, for waiting. It appears that Thune may impede the progress of the SAVE Act. Do you believe that the president could assert that foreign interference was a significant factor and issue an emergency ruling to mandate identification? Thank you, Guitar, for your question. Barbara and Susan.
Well, I'll take that. You know, basically, that's what the president is doing in a certain form. This investigation, which is about to come out about the infiltration of the Maricopa County, Arizona voter rolls, is all about that, about foreign people, foreign nations actually flooding through various forms of fake IDs, etc., the voting rolls in Maricopa County. This has been a long-standing investigation. I'm told it's very thorough. It's about to come out, and the president's going to use it to, you know, hit Thune and other, you know, people over the head of, you know, what the hell are you doing to the national security of this country? So yes, that's coming.
Thank you.
I think the way the president is proceeding at this point, you know, I mean, there has been maximum pressure put on these holdout Republicans, and we should not let up. And I encourage people to do what Barbara suggested a while ago, look up the contributors, the major donors of some of these holdouts, you know, and let them know you're not happy about their support for these saboteurs. But that being said, I think what the president is doing is probably about to unleash a series of exposés in terms of, you know, very hard evidence of how these operations have been run in the elections to increase from that standpoint the pressure not only on the Republicans but on the Democrats.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan. I'd like to give some more shout outs to our Canadian friends. Your work is invaluable. I am understanding the dynamics. Thank you very much, By Their World. Also, another Canadian friend here, I Backshift. Please do a damning truth piece on Mark Carney to help us Canadians out. Carney acting on behalf of the UK and the WEF, like a hit piece, but a truth piece. You know, we probably could do something like that with the help of AI. We could probably build out something like that. Thank you for joining us, iBackShift. Get on our free newsletter. You put that in my mind. I could develop a short white paper on Carney and go through some of what he's done over the decades, because truly he is like the face of all the central banks. When they need a spokesperson, it's definitely Mark Carney. So, so thank you very much for joining us, iBackShift. How about this one? Jim, them in Congress who are placed by election fraud don't want clean election. Know who they are? There's a bunch of them.
Yeah.
Most of the Democratic Party.
Probably every swing state Democrat, for starters.
Yeah. Thank you, Jim, combat veteran. Thank you so much. Get our free newsletter. Make sure you're subscribed. Our next political briefing is going to be on Saturday. So, yeah, make sure you're subscribed. Robert Skinner, thank you very much for the super chat. Promethean action fan with the Corgi dogs. Thank you very, very much for joining us and for changing your YouTube username to Promethean Action. Really appreciate it. Kristen, dollars, vitamins for midterm energy. Yes. Thank you. And thank you very much for joining us. Again, like I've been telling everyone, get our free newsletter. It's the best way for you guys to stay in contact with what we're doing. And also, you can always just send us an email. We set up a system now to catch everyone's email. So it'll give us a way for you to reach us with a message. David Gray, thank you for joining us again, our friends from the UK. Can you please explain what effect the meeting between Kirill Dmitriev, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and Josh Gruenbaum might have?
Don't know, but I suspect it has to do with both Ukraine and Iran. So that's what I was mentioning earlier. It's not Dmitriev, as usual, put up an X post saying it was very useful. I haven't heard anything from the U.S. side, but I wouldn't expect to, given all of the nonsense which has gone on around Russian targeting and all this other crap that's being circulated, against exactly what Russia could do in this situation to help us out.
Thank you, David, for joining us. And thank you, Paul, for joining us every week. John Dingle, please ask the president to save us here in the UK. I think we're doing our best in that. I think you guys are going to have to figure it out. It's the toughest thing to organize a nation. It takes a lot of people. Thank you for joining us, John. I don't know if we have any direct line to the president, but we are always thinking about the plight of our friends in the UK. Thank you.
And Canada and Australia.
And Canada. Yeah, I have here Ram Luxana from South Africa. How does a ship insurance work when the UK and shipping companies are friends? How did citizens get ripped off in the process? Well, this is the legacy of globalization that's been built out for
that's the problem, and you might add the oil companies into that framework. If you remember, when Venezuela happened, Trump invited them all in and said, I'd really like you to go down there and repair the infrastructure and drill and refine. And they said, like ExxonMobil said, well, we really are more concerned with the shareholder value of our stockholders. All right, is that really pro-America? No, I don't think so. So you got kind of a nasty problem here, not caused by anything Trump has done, and really exposing, if we really think about it, to the American people, how this actually works. How does it work when they don't ever actually drill for the oil? And, there is refining capacity in the world. How does it work that we've got prices like this? Well, you pretty much see it right there.
Thank you, Ram Luxama, for joining us. Also, Disastrophe. This might be something for Susan. Pierre of the Canadian Conservative Party is coming to the U.S. but is bypassing Trump. Instead, he is meeting with auto execs, etc. Is this an insult to Trump? What do you think about Pierre and his visit? Love you all. Thank you for joining us again, Disastrophe. Susan, Did you know he was meeting with the auto execs?
I did not know that. You know, from what I've been able to ascertain, and I'm not going to say this is my final word on it, but and I've gotten feedback from other people in Canada. The guy looks a little bit like controlled opposition to me. So the fact that he's coming and not meeting with Trump is another check mark on that possible conclusion.
Thank you very much, Susan. Pips and Chips, we love, value Promethean Action so much. We're supporting now with a paid option. We didn't know of this option, so please start inviting our viewers to this option to support it. You deserve it. Okay, everyone, if you didn't know, our free newsletter, not only do we have a free newsletter, but you can support us with a $10 a month subscription that helps keep our lights on. It helps us keep doing these shows every week, producing the emails, the YouTube. It keeps us active. It keeps our organizations on the streets and on social media. So if you would like to support us, you can get our free newsletter. If you already have our free newsletter, at the bottom of every email, you can manage your subscription. Right? There's a link to manage your subscription at the bottom of every Promethean Action email. You can manage your subscription and turn on the paid subscriptions. We offer some perks. I'm going to be releasing a new white paper for our 25 and above subscribers in the next few days. So I'll be releasing that. I'm also working to get the website functioning a little bit better for our paid subscribers. So if you want to help support us on a monthly basis, please go to our website, check out PrometheanAction.com. And as you sign up for a free newsletter, it'll give you the option to become a paid subscriber if you'd like. Thank you very much, Pips and Chips, for your support. And make sure you're subscribed to our free newsletter. Okay, Michael Austin Music. Love what you're doing. Just watched the video on the history of the U.S. and how the Brits have been jeopardizing the American dream and have showed it to several friends. I would be a little bit more specific. The best way I would begin to understand it is try to understand, where did this concept of globalization come from? I think that's one of the best ways to get a better understanding of what the British Empire represented today is like. Barbara and Susan, I'm sure, have some thoughts on that.
Well, the best reference point, I think, is a conversation which took place between Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill. And it's all recounted in a book by Elliot Roosevelt, his son, called As He Saw It. And basically, it concerned what would happen after World War II. And what Roosevelt said is, you got to end the British Empire. You got to end this colonization of the world, where essentially you go into countries, steal their resources, and don't develop them. We want to actually have a post-war world where we develop economically those nations. And if you look at Venezuela, or you look at Trump's vision for the Middle East, that's what you're actually seeing now. The difference between the two systems. The American system says, we want to use our technology, our scientific advances, everything else to give everybody the best chance at life, the best chance at an industrialized economy so they can actually operate. The British system says, no, we want the resources, and we'll give you in return appropriate technologies to your, kind of level of bestial development here. My old friend, the former Minister of Guyana, Fred Willis, used to say, if you want to actually see what the British Empire is, say that you, as a third world country, that you want a nuclear power plant. You'll see it right away. You'll probably get killed. So that's the difference.
Adam, could you pull up the Promethean PAC website toolkit? Because I had seen a couple of questions in the chat, and then it sort of relates to this. We have a lot of books that our colleagues have written on this absolutely vital history. If you go to the Promethean Action website, which I think Adam is doing right now, we have along the top bar, it says toolkit. And in there, our friends, it has a number of things. It's got our key reports, but if you see their books, it's got our reports, but then it's got our books. Look at that. We got a lot of books. We have a couple of prolific writers, Brian Lance, Robert, who writes a lot on the economy, and Robert Ingram, who writes a tremendous amount on American history. And I would just sort of say, as a basic starting point, the one on the very bottom, in terms of the Anglo-Dutch Empire, its origins, evolution, and anti-human outlook, I think it's the first book he wrote. And it really is a basic starting point for locating yourself in history in terms of how this has actually evolved. But they're all great books.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, Michael. Make sure you're subscribed, get our free newsletter. Love to have you aboard. All right, let's give a quick shout out to Fenderman. Thank you for joining us, Fenderman. People need to understand that everyone comes from somewhere. Scott Besson is the perfect example of somebody you want in your administration because he knows the enemy's network. I think Barbara and I and Susan all definitely agree with you. Thank you very much, Fenderman. Okay, let's jump back to another question. Whoops. So back to another question here on the British Empire from Laura. I have a Muslim male friend originally from Jordan who has been in the country for 33 years. He loves this country and voted for Trump. He is always consumed with what is going on in the Middle East and, of course, blames Israel for every single thing. He says the people in Iran that are for Trump are Jewish Iranians. Please tell me, how can I explain the connection to the British that have to all of this and not Israel? He only watches and listens to Al Jazeera and is on Muslim Facebook pages. I am a novice at learning about the British connection and don't have a clue as to how to explain it to him. Please help. Thanks. Thank you, Laura, for your honest question. I think we have already outlined some of this question already, but let's kind of circle back to it. What's the long-term play here for the British and the Middle East?
Well, look, I think the problem that your friend has, that a lot of people have, is they just get trapped in this binary world. You know, you're either pro-Israel or you're pro-Muslim or you're pro-Palestinian or you're pro-Israel or whatever, you know, that there's only two sides to this. And you're right. The issue of the British, I think, is fundamental. I think the best that you can do is just try and encourage your friend to look at the history, not from the current crisis, because this is where it gets very difficult. Obviously, emotions are incredibly high in the Muslim Arab community, in the Jewish community, you know, in all sorts of communities, especially when there's bombs falling. You know, and so trying to extract them from the immediate situation is very difficult because of that kind of emotional connection. Somehow you've got to take them back through history. You know, how was the current Middle East created in the first place? Who drew the boundaries? You know, Sykes-Picot at the turn of the century. Barbara may have more to say on this, but the other thing I would suggest that you do, because I think it's going to give you a certain richness in terms of how to think about this and the British question, is a book that we've referenced on many occasions, not written by one of our immediate colleagues, but it's the book written by Richard Poe entitled How the British Created Communism and Blamed It on the Jews. And that is an amazingly documented book, which takes you through a couple of hundred years of history. And, you know, you might see if you can convince your friend to read it, because it takes it out of the Mideast. And as I say, I think it's going to be very difficult, you know, for people who are so emotionally invested in what is going on there, to, you know, maybe think clearly at this point. Take it out of the immediate. See if you can get him to look at another angle on this. But I think you should read it first, and then you might get some ideas in terms of how to approach that.
Yeah, I hate to make reading assignments to people, but it's pretty important at this point to actually look at how the British have worked all sides of this type of situation for their own benefit for years. One book which I highly recommend, and it's based on British declassified documents. It's a book by Mark Curtis, who writes all the time on this, and it's called Secret Affairs. There's another book involving Iran specifically and the Muslim Brotherhood, which he also treats, by Robert Dreyfus, and it's called Devil's Game. And both of them are available on Amazon. Both of them go through the history that led to the present situation with radical Islam and how it was actually created. Political Islam has very little to do with the Islamic religion and its history. It's a recent kind of British manipulation of and creation literally from the Orientalists at Cambridge and Oxford universities way back in the previous century, for the purpose of creating a grouping which could attack the Soviet Union on its southern flank. The guy in the United States who was the implementer of this was Zbigniew Brzezinski. And it was all part and parcel of a strategy of driving the Middle East back into the Dark Ages. If you have permanent warfare, like the religious wars which we've had in history, then areas of the world simply don't develop. And I went into this in a little bit more depth in a previous video, where I actually talked about a book called Hostage to Khomeini, which you can also pick up. That's on the Internet Archive. And that was written by my colleagues way back when, in 1980, at the point where the Iranian Revolution was actually happening. And I reread it. It is invaluable, because it tells you, it's an on-the-ground report of why this happened, who was responsible, including in the United States, but mostly British influenced and led at that point by BP. And it gives you a perspective on why this happened. And it's all about economics. It's not about religion. It's about using religion to create economic chaos. And that's been British grand strategy for a very, very, very long time.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Susan. Thank you to everyone who's been tuning in for the last 2 hours. Also to all the super chats, I'm going to show some on the screen. Thank you, Tabor. Thank you, Lacastrian. Steve, thank you so much. Yes, the Dominion voting machines. Thank you, Melody, for joining us every week. Texas barbecue. Nope, we did not discuss Cuba today, but we're definitely watching that. Thank you, PF Favata. Thank you so much. Truth, big fan. So many people. Jeff in Utah. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Truth. Everyone, we'll see you next week. Please make sure you're subscribed to our free newsletter. The link is in the description. And our next political briefing will be on Saturday. Barbara and Susan, any last words before we end the show?
When we're going through this kind of change, it's always turbulent, folks. And you just have to remember, we're breaking the sound barrier in a certain sense here, and that we're changing everything. And there's something on the other side which is relatively calm.
And, I would just say, one of the best ways to keep yourself focused is to go out and organize, not just sit there and try and figure out what's going on based on some social media outrage world.
Yeah, it's so funny. I just pulled up this one. It's from Grunt, another longtime viewer. Susan, you're so right about organizing. I can't express enough to our American youth from all cultures, faith, lifestyles need this information and the history that Barbara shared in her book. And Barbara doesn't have a book yet, but she'd probably write one. Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.